thank you very much. When I was invited to this great session, I was told that I was to speak about theory in action. So let me begin with theory and then put it into action. So what is driving change in the world? So most of you all are young. Not as young as me, but young. And what are the big things? There are three obvious changes, and I think the previous speakers alluded to them. The first one is globalization. And globalization is going to happen, and no one is going to be able to stop it. Because globalization happens because people try to get to places that are better. They try to connect with places that are better. The next one is digitization. So anything that can become digital will become digital. And the third one is demographic shifts. And the previous speaker mentioned that the top honors students in India were more than all the students in the United States. Demographic shifts are pretty significant, but I will give you another way to look at it. China and India are often mentioned in the same breath. I spend a week every quarter in China, a week every quarter in India. There's only two things that are similar. They both have 1 billion people, and they're both in Asia. After that, they couldn't be more different. And one of the big differences is demographics. China is a rapidly aging country, while 50% of Indians are under 25 years old. When you go to a mall, and my wife, when she first was in a mall in China, she noticed there was something strange. There was nobody who had kids, or very few kids. If you go to a mall in India, the only thing you see are kids. And so to a great extent, demographics defines where the world is going to go. It's one of the reasons why the Chinese don't spend too much money. Because of the one-child policy, you have 4 grandparents, 1 grandchild. It's also one of the reasons why the Chinese are the fastest users of technology. Most Chinese use avatars because to a certain extent, for the young people, all their friends are online. There is no brother, there is no sister. So simple things like this explain a lot of the change in the world. So demographics, globalization, digitization. But when you combine those three, you have some strange things that begin to happen. Going back to those same countries, 10 days apart. On March 16th, I was in China. When you open a newspaper in China on March 16th, every newspaper had a black apple. I don't know Mandarin, but I know what a black apple logo looks like, and it's the Apple company logo, but in black. Because on March 15th, they have Consumer Day, and CCTV, which is basically the main television channel there, decides to pick on 3 companies who they believe are not good consumer companies. And they selected Apple. Why? Because Apple gives a 1-year warranty, while China insists on a 2-year warranty. For the next 2 weeks, all over the world, including in China, there was this big noise about Apple. It took Tim Cook 2 weeks to apologize. And why was that rumor, or not that rumor, but that sort of fact made aware of all over the world? Because of digitization, which is something that ran on television in China, was all over the world. But also because it spoke to an underlying truth, which is maybe Apple is an arrogant company. So these things work very interestingly together when you think about globalization, digitization, and demographic shifts. But I'll give you 3 new changes that are coming, and that'll be the end of the theory section. Those 3 are the following. We are living in a world of the connection engine. And you might ask, what is the connection engine? The connection engine is the internet as seen through people's eyes and not through engineers. So when you talk to people, they talk about internet, technology, IP, all kinds of other things. Most people in the world don't give a damn about that. What they do know is they connect to discover when they use Google. They connect to transact when they use Amazon. They connect to share when they use Facebook. They connect to tell people what they ate when they use Twitter, right? And they connect to amuse themselves when they use Netflix. So we're living in a connection engine world where people are connecting. The second big shift is digital leakage. And digital leakage does not mean that someone who's an engineer wants to go to the bathroom. Digital leakage basically means that anything that is digital automatically destroys the industry boundaries that it is in and all other industry boundaries. I go to Silicon Valley every month. One of these days, there are going to be armed guards between Cupertino and Mountain View. Why? Because Google and Facebook hate each other. And you might say, why should they hate each other? One's a big discovery engine leader, one's a big sharing engine leader. The reason being is that most people are now discovering through sharing. So often your friends will tell you what to go out to eat. They'll tell you what you think about, so they now are competing. Why does Amazon, who sits there as the big transaction engine in Seattle, also hate Google? Well, it's really Google hates Amazon. Why? Because 13% of all e-commerce searches start on Google. 30% of all e-commerce searches start on Amazon. So we're living in a world of digital leakage, which means the threats and opportunities for any industry come from outside the industry. And finally, the third is the era of the people's network. And people's network is broadly what social media is. But social media is not really social media, because if you look at something like Facebook, we spend approximately 70% of our time on Facebook looking at pictures. 20% of the time on Facebook curating our lives to make them look better than they are. 5% on Facebook telling everybody how cool we are. If I came into your house, looked at your photographs, told you how much better I was than you and how you are a loser, would you consider that to be social? Right? It's the people's network. We're basically engaging and we're broadcasting ourselves and curating our lives. There's a lot of research that says if you spend a lot of time on Facebook, you will hate yourself because everybody seems to be having more fun. So then you try to make yourself have more fun too. So those are the big shifts that are going on in the world. What does that mean with regard to mindsets? The first one, to a great extent, which is extremely important, is what I just said. When everything is going to become digital, the future isn't actually digital. The future is going to be digital and analog. And the reason is because digital means it's zeros and ones, which means yeses and nos. Do you know of anybody who actually answers yeses or nos, excepting the University of Chicago admission group? Right? Most of the time you say, it depends on my mood, maybe. People are analog, and most people realize that. The reason to this date why people will buy Apple, even though it doesn't have as good sometimes technology as a lot of everybody else, is because design matters. Because people choose with their hearts and they use numbers to justify what they just did. If that was not true, there would be no Mercedes, there would be no Porsches, there would be no Jaguars. Right? So when people tell me it's about data, my stuff is, really? It's not true. Because if it was all about data, we wouldn't have any of these things. The second thing that is extremely important to recognize in this new world is that the future will come from the slime and not the heavens. And you might say, what does that mean? It basically means the following. If you want to know what the future of television is, do not, under any circumstances, go to New York City, right? To go learn from CBS or NBC or ABC, or go to Philadelphia to learn from Comcast. The future of television is likely to be much more coming from Amazon, from Google, but most likely from Netflix. I'll give you a statistic, or 3 statistics, that are absolutely true, and you can look them up in the latest BusinessWeek. Number 1, Netflix has 36 million subscribers. Number 2, those subscribers spend 4 billion hours a quarter watching Netflix. Number 3, on any given day, Netflix users use 33% of the internet's capacity. More than Amazon, Google, Facebook, combined. That's where the future of television is coming from. I go west, not east, okay, which is kind of interesting. The third one, which I think you should be also aware of, is ownership is going to matter less and less, and access is going to matter more and more. There's an entire generation, and you all might be it, the whole idea of owning matters less and less. It's one of the reasons why rental apartments are going up all over the place. It's not just because housing costs obviously had fallen, I mean not housing costs, but housing prices had fallen. People began to realize, why the hell should I actually work for a bank? Because when you take on a mortgage, you actually end up working for a bank. So a lot of people say, maybe I should work for myself. Why can't I have the flexibility to move to different places? It's one of the reasons why in the next few weeks, you're going to basically see Apple introduce something which very much looks like Spotify. Because most people want to now access their music and not buy it. Steve Jobs was absolutely wrong when he says people want to own their music. Spotify, for those of you who use it, or Netflix, for those of you who use it, or Zipcar, for those of you who use it, or Airbnb, is all about access. It's not about ownership. And the third one, or another one besides the ones I've already given you, which probably is the fourth one, besides analog and access and slime, is that the only way an organization changes, whether it's a university or whether it's a company, are only two ways. It's not through acquisitions. It's not through some massive restructuring or engineering. There are only two ways. You can change the people, or you can change people's mindsets. That's it. There are no other ways to change a company. No way to change an institution. And the only way you can change people's mindsets is by changing their incentives. You know, Stephen Levitt Year wrote this book called Freakonomics, which basically says if you understand someone's incentives, you understand their behavior. So when somebody tells me that their company is going to do X, I say, how are you paying? If you're paying in a different way, they're still going to do X. And that's one of the reasons why change comes so slowly to a lot of companies, because they cannot change people's mindsets. So most people and most companies change the people. But in order not to change, or not to be changed out, there are a few things that you can do. So the first thing that you can do is recognize that despite the fact that everybody says change is good for you, change sucks. Okay? So I've worked for the same boss for 13 years, worked for the same company for 30 years, lived in Chicago for 32 years, and now I know my wife for 41 years, even though it was not a child marriage. I hate change. I'm responsible for driving change for 60,000 people and 50 of the top 100 Fortune 100 companies, though I hate it. And the reason basically is the only way you change, if you want things to remain the same, you have to change. Because someone told me the only way to have things remain the same is you have to change, nobody else will change, because time always changes. So towards that, there are 4 or 5 tricks that I would suggest that you use. The first is take what you hear as obvious and assume that it's not true. So for instance, only the paranoid will survive. Andy Grove. Intel is going broke because of that stupid idea. In an open and networked world, collaboration is critical. If you are paranoid, you are dead. Only the schizophrenic will thrive. That's what you need to do. You got to run 2 models. You got to basically do what you do today in your life, and then you want to do something that attacks what you actually do. Run your company, attack your company, right? It's very, very simple, because those are the companies that do well. In a very odd way, Google is disrupting itself faster than anybody can disrupt Google. Netflix is disrupting itself faster than anybody can disrupt Netflix. So you have to sort of disrupt yourself, and that becomes extremely important. Another thing that you need to be very aware of is understand what innovation is. So I'm supposed to be the Chief Strategy and Chief Innovation Officer, so I've always been scared about someone asking me what the hell is strategy and what the hell is innovation. So strategy is very simple. It's future competitive advantage, which is understand where the future is going, understand who your competitors are, and decide what your advantage is. What's important to recognize in the future, your competitors are not going to be your competitors today. But innovation, since this is the innovation section, is fresh, insightful connections. So it's how do you connect things in an interesting way. So the reason the iPad was so successful is not because the tablet came from the hands of Steve Jobs. Bill Gates actually came up with the tablet a long time ago. But Bill Gates basically always thought of everything through Windows and everything through work. And Steve Jobs recognized that human beings had two devices. We had a device to create with called a computer, and we had a device to communicate with called a phone. But we had no device, so one for sitting, one for standing. But we had no device for slouching or consuming. And that's really what he did deliver, a consumption device. It's the reason why it isn't built for work. It's a consumption device. And that was a very interesting, fresh, insightful connection. So how do you all get fresh, insightful connections? 3 tricks. I'll stop right there. Trick number 1, do at least one new thing every day. Okay, which includes sometimes take a walk in a different direction than you've actually taken. Read a book, see a movie that you haven't seen, go visit somebody that you haven't done, drink a beer that you haven't drunk before. One fresh thing. Because if you don't have fresh stuff coming in, there's no way you can do insightful connections. Second is spend at least 25% of your time when you have your free time, which is rare, in doing things that are not off your industry, off your topic, off your academic background. Because otherwise, you're going to basically become extremely incestuous and insular, and you're going to give birth to bastard ideas. Okay, and that's what you see again and again. The third, to a great extent, is learn how to reinvent yourself. And the most important thing in reinventing yourself are 2. We're living in a world where brands will matter. So understand what your brand is. Because in the end, your brand will actually be, and your resume will actually be what Google says it is. It's not what you write, it's not what LinkedIn writes, it's what Google writes. That's how most people find out who you are. They go to Google. And if that's where they go, what you need to do is be very active in social media and write a blog. If you're a young person not writing a blog and not active in social media, Google will decide who you are. It's time you decide who you are. Thank you.